Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this town hall meeting. We had a similar session this morning. The intent of this is to sort of close the loop on the process that begins when we have the budget hearings with the deans and other members of those colleges where requests are made, and then after Noel and others, we get together and think about what we can do. We have individual meetings with deans to give them a heads up on some of the budget issues that may affect their colleges. But this is a chance to share some of that message with the broader university community. This is not intended to be a State of the University address. We're going to have that in November. I know you can't wait for that. What was that laughter for? It's going to be different this year, no PowerPoint. I made the comment this morning at somebody in the office. I said, no PowerPoint. And they said, I suspect it will be content-free as well. But so what we want to do today is review some of the broader high-level budget issues. Vice President of Finance Administration, Noel Sloan, will do that. Provost Gallion will talk about issues that affect faculty. Dr. Sumner will address matters related to diversity of the faculty and our student body. And then Dr. Heppert will address issues related to research. Byron Kennedy, who likes to make a grand late entrance. Now, we just came from a meeting with the the CH Foundation over at the medical school. And speaking of philanthropy and advancement, Byron will talk about our fundraising and the priorities and goals. And then Grace Hernandez will address matters that relate to our Centennial Celebration. And there is one slide that I'll make a few comments about as we start. Most of you have seen this. It was distributed to the university community. It's interesting how this is received in the broader university community. I hear from a lot of alumni when we send this to them. And their question is, are you going to make $40,000? And in fact, there was a reporter in the office yesterday who kept hammering this point. Are you going to make 40? How did you come up with 40? And I wanted to say I had no part of that. But there are reasons growth is important in this state in the way higher ed is funded, where our general revenue is dependent upon just the student credit hours we teach. And we live in one of those few states that has a large population of high school students that results in growth. It's kind of interesting for people to find out that in the Big 12 conference, and we compare ourselves to those institutions many times because academically they're very similar and they're very strong, we're the second largest institution. Texas, UT, then us, then Iowa State. But in the state of Texas, we are only the 7th largest institution. And we are not one of the faster growing institutions, and I'm fine with that. But nevertheless, we do pay attention to that. But what I'm particularly pleased by this year is the substantial growth in our graduate programs. As a Tier 1 Carnegie school, that's so important to our research enterprise, and I really appreciate that we're continuing to grow our graduate enrollment. I think what's also very significant there, more than any growth factor, is the improvement in student success metrics. Last year, we enrolled the largest freshman class in the history of Texas Tech, nearly 6,200, and we've retained 87%. If you go back to 2010-11, our retention rate was more like 80. And we were enrolling a class of 4,000 to 4,500. To grow that freshman class and retain more speaks to the efforts of staff and faculty and the more intrusive and professional advising processes that are in place. And that's starting to show up in our graduation rates. We saw a 2% increase in our 5-year rate. We had an increase. We had about a 3 to 4% increase in our 4-year. Those numbers are still not where they need to be. We're finally seeing some movement in the 6-year rate, which shows up in so many rankings. These are the things that matter. That when we enroll somebody, we graduate them. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Noel.
To kind of again, close the loop on the budget hearings. Every year when we do the budget hearings, we have a large amount of asks. But this year was a very favorable year for higher education. As we close the legislative session, this biennium is probably one of the best ones in my career in higher ed that we've seen the state support higher education. And for Texas Tech, that meant funding for our School of Veterinary Medicine, which is a very big milestone, as well as an increase. We saw about 5.8% increase in our general revenue as the state supported enrollment growth across the state. And this includes an increase in our core research funding as well, which is attributable to the increases that we have in our research expenditures. As well as state funding, our institutional funding, our tuition and fees, we're on a 2-year cycle. And so in December of 2017, the Board of Regents had approved a tuition increase of 2.4% that went in effect this fall. That is to help keep up with inflationary costs. But we also had a semester credit hour growth that was incorporated into this budget. So we continue to do very well on our semester credit hour growth, particularly in last summer and the summer before, with increased specific scholarships to help our students with taking more classes in summer to be sure they're completing 30 semester credit hours a year to graduate in 4 years, as well as partnering with our housing to offer 50% off in our honors residence hall to keep more students on campus. With that, we saw a 5.3% increase in our semester credit hours this summer over the prior summer. I say that because this summer will again be important for us as we start the next counting period again for the next legislative session. So we took that funding, both the increase in general revenue from the state and the increase we have in our institutional tuition, and really put that back into our faculty, staff, and students. So throughout the budget hearings and all the requests, we continued about $10 million in continued funding and invested $18 million more in new funding. And that included investments in faculty and staff to include the 2% merit pool, a lot of our mid-career or equity adjustment pools for our faculty, increasing what we have in the spousal accommodation pool, continuing the diversity pool, as well as impacting all staff with increases in retirement contributions and increasing our minimum wage to $11 per hour. In addition to faculty and staff investments, we invested in students, putting more into scholarships, about $2 million each, to support both need and merit-based scholarships. Additional money was put out into colleges, including establishing our institutional advancement. Byron is now the VP over that area, actually on our campus. This is the first year we've had an institutional advancement as part of our Texas Tech University, and Byron will be able to share some more about what's been accomplished and what will be coming up in the upcoming year. And then we continue to invest in Raider rooms. This is $4 million a year that we invest to update classrooms and class labs, and this has had a really good feedback from the users of those rooms, as well as how we use that space. So we're being more efficient in how we use those rooms, which feeds into our higher education fund allocation from the state as well. In addition to state, institutional, we continue to look for alternative revenue sources, and we'll speak to that in a little bit more. But as you'll see on the next slide, when you talk about these different buckets of money, and I know nobody can see all these numbers on there, but the colors are what's important. So for fiscal year 20, our current fiscal year now, we have reached a milestone at Texas Tech University having our first operating budget over $1 billion. However, to put that in perspective, it's a 3.5% increase over last year, and last year we had a 3.7% increase over the prior year. So it's just the natural growth of the institution. But if you look at the colored bar chart, what we did, and we've seen this as we did college forums, the 10-year perspective, but this year we went back all the way to 1990. So that first bar on there is 30 years ago. The second bar is 2000, 20 years ago. And if you look at that, that bottom bar is the percentage of funding of our budget that we got from the state. So 30 years ago, we got 56% of our operating budget from the state, and only 13% came from tuition and fees. 20 years ago, we got 47% from the state and 20% from our tuition and fees. But if you look at the last 10 years, it's really kind of leveled out, and we're getting about 30% from the state and 37% from our institutional tuition. So we've kind of evened out there, and we need to be cognizant of what other alternative revenue sources can help support the institution other than tuition and fees. A little bit about the state funding component, though, is in that 29%, almost 30% that we get from the state. Only 16% now is coming from our formula funding, our weighted semester credit hour. The rest is coming from our higher education funds, our NREF funds, our state tuition, make up the balance of that 30%. But 16% is still a strong number, and we need to, like it or not, that's how we're funded in this state, and it's still very important to have that weighted semester credit hour generation. Next slide. On scholarships then, also as this has, the cost has continued to meet inflationary needs, we also need to balance that with access and affordability. And so there's been a large increase in our scholarships over the years. Currently, approximately about 60% of all undergraduate and graduate students receive some type of grant or scholarship. But even just this last year, from fiscal year 18 to 19, there was a $10 million increase in financial aid awarded. And if you look at the last decade, there's been just in presidential merit scholarships an increase of 300%, impacting 9,000 students. So this is very important for our institution to continue that scholarship support, of which Byron will share a little bit more in his presentation. Provost will now talk about faculty.
Thank you, Noelle. I wanted to spend just a few slides and a couple of minutes talking to you about the size and composition of our faculty, as well as some salary information comparisons with peers. If you look at the top part of this slide, we have just under 1,800 faculty. This does not include GPTIs or TAs. These are full and part-time faculty. If you subtract the part-time, it's about 1,500. And if you subtract if you account for tenured versus non-tenured in that, we're right at 1,100 tenured or tenure track, and the remainder are about 400 or so being non-tenured full-time faculty members. So people in the instructor or professor of practice ranks. If you look at the bar chart on the bottom, it shows how things have changed over the last 6 years. That is essentially a 16% increase over that 6-year period in faculty headcount. That is not shown on here, but stacks up against about a 15% increase in student headcount. So we basically have matched the percentage growth, at least, in students with faculty growth has matched with that. Chris, next slide. Yeah, thank you. If you look at the distribution or the composition of our faculty, you'll notice pretty quickly that's what's changing the most are the black bars being the non-tenured ranks. If you look across that time span between 2013, 2018 on our tenured and tenure track ranks and add those up, it varies between about 1,070 to 1,100. So we haven't changed a lot. We've grown a little bit in that regard on tenured and tenure track ranks, but most of our growth has been in the non-tenured ranks. And I think that reflects the fact that we have grown significantly in student numbers and in SCH generation, and thereby we need to meet the instructional demands associated with that. And so we've hired a lot of people in the more instructional side of the business. Obviously, Joe's going to talk about the research side later, which would be reflection of some of the increases that we've had in the tenure track area. If you look at the next slide, that is an attempt to illustrate to you that we have kept up with our SCH generation. Faculty members, and I will admit that in your world, in your department, in your own life, It may not be less now than it was 5 or 6 years ago, but overall, when you compare when you look at the SEH per faculty FTE, that has decreased slightly over time. The trend certainly is for a decrease. You could call it stable if you wish. But I realize within particular departments and programs, there's different pressures that will affect that. And in some programs, the amount of SCH per FTE has gone up, and others it's gone down. But overall for the university, it suggests that we have done a pretty good job of keeping up on our faculty numbers with respect to the increasing instructional demands. If you look at the next slide, and we're going to have a series of 3 slides here which reflect the salary information. The gold bars would be the Big 12. The red bars would be our emerging research universities within the state of Texas. This is starting with professor, and we'll go to associate and then to assistant professors. And the percentages on the bars are the percentage we are at of each one of those groups. So we are, as you can see, if you just look at 2017, and these data are from 2017, so it's a little, it's not as up to date as we might like. We won't actually get the 2018 data till I think later in the spring. Yeah, so it takes a long time, not necessarily to get our data, but to get the comparative data. If you look at the 2017 data, we are a little bit lower, but not too bad. We probably do as well on the professor rank as we do on any of the ranks. We're at about 96% of the Big 12 on our professor salaries in 2017. Since then, we've had at least 2 equity raises, one mid-year last year and one that came along with merit raises this fall. Hopefully those things have helped at least keep us to where we were and hopefully increase us a little bit. And it's our intent, I think, to continue to do that as long as we have the budgetary wherewithal to do so. The next slide would be associate professors. Thank you, you're ahead of me. Okay. You can see that we do about like professors. We're doing 97% in this case of the Big 12, a little bit lower on the emerging research university comparison. And finally, the next slide, assistant professors, we're actually doing a little bit less than I expected. I mean, I think most of us generally think we do a pretty good job of keeping up on starting salaries. So this one did surprise me a little bit that we are a bit lower than our Big 12 and emerging research university peers. Again, that's something as we do replacements, we usually have the flexibility to make some adjustments in that. So I would encourage dean's offices to kind of watch that and make sure that you're checking what our peers are doing. At least we can get the starting salary right. And now I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Sumner to talk about some of our diversity profiles.
Good afternoon. Certainly the data will be shown on the screen. We'd like to share, as you're looking at the demographics of the staff, we are mindful of ways that we might be able to partner across the university to continue to grow the number and the diversity amongst our faculty, staff, and students. These are the numbers of faculty and staff. Particularly as staff, you'll see the ratio of female to male, more female staff than male. The demographics related to race and ethnicity. Again, Hispanic is an ethnicity. Race is differentiated by white, Asian, Black, African American, or multiple. International is rolled into these statistics, or the data as you'll see it here. As you go to the next slide, you'll see a flip in terms of gender. We have more male faculty members than we do female faculty members. And you will see a similar holding to the race and ethnicity. This will be available as we continue to grow our faculty ranks. We are also looking at mechanisms that we can provide training and opportunity for faculty who serve on search committees. So we recently implemented a search committee training for faculty members that is not solely about diversity, but really at looking at how are we assessing and evaluating faculty members as they're bringing in new areas of research. That then lends itself also to the tenure and promotion process, which has other considerations that we'll be looking at. If you'll forward to the next slide, our undergraduate demographics have continued to increase in the number of diverse students who are enrolling and finding Texas Tech to be the place they want to call home. As you'll look across, I want you to pay attention to almost center, non-resident. While we in the past have used a different terminology, we have worked with institutional research and other offices to change that title. that it no longer reads non-resident alien. We were specifically asked to change that. Language matters. And so it will now be listed as non-resident international. And we want to make sure that we're continuing to work on our language. You'll also note the percentage of students in the undergraduate population has been 29.8. That is the final criteria to establish that we are a Hispanic serving institution. The criteria for the number of students is 25%. That number has continued to rise. And then the next slide you will see, similarly, our demographics for our international student population. Those numbers continue to raise and grow. We are working with undergraduate and graduate admissions to find opportunities that we might message that Texas Tech is exactly the place where they want to be. I do want to share something I didn't share this morning. At 9 o'clock this morning, Texas Tech was announced as one of the 94 institutions to again receive the Higher Education Excellence and Diversity Award. That is because of the work that you do. So continue to do the work in creating a place where students of all kinds, faculty and staff of all kinds, find this the place they'd want to call home. Thank you, and on to Joe Hepburn.
Okay, well, congratulations to all of you again, because it's been a very, very solid year for Texas Tech research. I'm calling out just a few of the highlights of this year. There have been many, and so I'm sure I'm going to miss and offend somebody here. But some of the things I want to point out are that we were reclassified as a Carnegie Research One very high research institution this year. That's incredibly important for Texas Tech's national reputation, and it's a great outcome for the university. You can see that great things were happening all across the campus. We won 3 National Endowment for Humanities awards this year, including some very, very prestigious awards. The College of Education got over $9 million in funding to support U.S. Prep, a new model for teacher preparation. Again, as Carol said, we were designated as a Hispanic serving community, and a variety of groups have really jumped on that opportunity to begin writing grants that will support students and expanded research in many of those areas. 2 Texas Tech researchers, Harvinder Gill and Steve Presley, were funded on a really ambitious project to create a new universal flu vaccine. And that's so exciting because flu, we don't think about it, but flu is such an incredible problem across the world for the human race. It's exciting just to see the range of high impact studies that you're all engaged in. And we've got not only ESB2 that's coming on board, the ribbon cutting will be next month in October, but we've also begun discussions with deans and with academic units about needs that can go into the new academic science building. Research, it's been a banner year for some of the outcomes of research. I always say that money is important only because it allows some Texas Tech researchers who need it to sustain their research to do what they want to do. But another thing I'll point out is that often some of the resources that come back to the Office of Research and Innovation as a result of this go out to support all sorts of different programs across the campus, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We're not only at a high in terms of total research expenditures over the last few years, but we're also really pushing the envelope and at a high point with regard to federal research expenditures. And that, as it turns out, is not only important because of the resources that come back to support scholarship across the campus, but it's also important because that's a critical piece of our reputational currency with respect to other institutions, and it goes into the rankings of our institution compared to other research institutions across the country. Another good harbinger for the future is that federal award dollars overall were at their highest level, I think, over the history of Texas Tech. We've actually just exceeded $45 million, haven't quite closed out the fiscal year yet, but this is a great outcome compared to the previous years. Again, we need to keep pushing on these kinds of results. The warning sign, I think, for us, and where we face a challenge, and we'll be working with the community, is on this slide. The top level is the number of federal proposals and awards that we've submitted over, you can see, over the last 5 years. The bottom is the awards we've received. So we've increased the number of awards, and that's great, but you'll notice we have not increased the number of grants we submit. And if we're going to make significant changes here that will really help propel Texas Tech's ranking and reputation across the country, we're going to be working on helping faculty write more proposals. Okay, so these are going to be some of the emphases that we'll be focusing on over the coming year. I've got to say, I've met many of the junior faculty that have come into programs across the campus, and we are doing a great job of really recruiting high-quality people. Keep it up. We're going to be continuing to try to partner with research and academic leaders across the campus to bring in the highest quality faculty. We're going to try to work on increasing success in grant writing, and many of you know we had workshops last year intended to do that, especially for younger people, but we're going to continue to work hard on that. We want to sustain funding for the humanities, arts, and social sciences programs as well. It's been a real pleasure to be associated with helping to fund a number of conferences and also visiting scholarships in the arts and humanities over the past couple of years. We've already got an additional one of those scheduled to be funded this year. Again, we're going to work on opportunities to enhance submission of federal grants by trying to knock down some of the barriers that keep people from writing more grants. In addition, we're looking for additional scholarly themes in which the university can invest long-term. And as you know, in the past, I've invited white papers, the best concepts to come forward. I want more of those ideas on the table so we can work with the academic leaders to try to realize some of those visions. Planning for research investment in infrastructure, as we've gone through, and it's wonderful that we have one new building coming online right now and another new building in the wings, but we realize that's not going to take care of all of the needs for improvement of infrastructure, and infrastructure is so integral to supporting what we do. And so we're going to be working very, very closely on developing long-term plans for improving research infrastructure on the campus. Finally, I'd say it was a great year this past year in terms of our innovation and entrepreneurship efforts. Our connections with the community are becoming stronger all the time in those areas, and we're going to work as an institution to really try to raise the profile of those activities over the coming year. Byron, I'm going to turn to you for information about advancement.
Good afternoon. You know, as you walk up here, you think of a lot of little intro jokes that you could use to kind of get into it, but I'll spare us all and we'll just get into the numbers. The story that you hear in so many thematic ways from the different folks on the stage is the same story for advancement in philanthropy. It's young, but it's growing. If you look at the slide we're showing here, from 2011 to 2018, you see an increase in the endowment funds set aside for TTU from $475 million to almost $775 million. I mean, that's explosive growth. That's the long-term funds that are set back forever for any number of restricted uses. Our challenge right now is self-realization, is to understand what a nearly $800 million operation looks like, how it acts, how it staffs, how we can continue to partner with the folks that got us there, and the faculty with their ideas, and the student and the quality things that they do. So again, along with, as we continue to grow students and we grow faculty, we grow diversity, philanthropy continues to keep up. So if this is the long-term look as to what's in the bank, Chris, this is how we do every year. These are big numbers. Those are numbers that we're proud of. What you'll also notice is those are wild fluctuations. We obviously, in philanthropy, don't influence the timing of gifts, and often we don't influence the amount of gifts. Those are things that, when generous people are affiliated with the university, when we have ideas that are captivating, those are things that we help match up. But from an operational standpoint, the important thing there is that volatility. We will always, as we said earlier this morning, we will always go after the big and the top gifts. But we know in any one year, how we actually finish out will be largely impacted by one or two large gifts. And we'll always, again, as we said before, always chase that big number, but the health of our institution won't be in continuing to hit 150, 170, 180. We will get there. The health of the institution will be not going back to 86. And so what we're going to try to do is draw a broader net, to think wider, to be on the phone, to be better in communication, to try to really widen the funnel and look to not going back to 86. Look to setting a new floor and then launching from there going forward. I think that will be reflective of the health of the organization, Chris. So if we looked at what we're trying to do this year, that's it. We may be the most quantifiable group on campus, so it's a little bit harrowing to stand up here and say, hey, this is who we're going to be, but we're going to try to always shoot for $100 million. We set our annual plans together every August, and we know that that's if everything happens according to our plans, and very rarely is that the case. Work with the deans here on the front. They know that the best laid plans come and go. But we do have a very intentional process, and we set goals. So if you see goals around fundraising, those are aspirational. Those are what we want to do and what we want to be. But we continue to mark success at several different numbers. One of our big challenges is, as Noel said, we're now centralized onto campus. We have a campus presence. Our goal is to support the president and the deans, the faculty and staff specifically at TTU, and we've got a team to do it. We're growing that team now and making sure that we bring in the right kind of people to do the right kind of work. That'll be a focus for 2020. And again, the last item, we want to do this in partnership with the larger community. With that growth, with that explosion of endowment dollars, to make sure we put those to use. If there are scholarships or accounts that are difficult to use, please partner with us as we can help you loosen criteria. But the best way to find new money is to be good stewards of the money that you have. And so that'll be a continued drumbeat that you hear from us as we partner with all colleges and programs about putting the money that we have to use, thinking big, having a vision. Our job sometimes is to be a little bit bold, a little bit audacious, but we have great partners in the university community to do that with us. With that being said, I think I'll bring Noel back up to talk facilities.
Yeah, so kind of parallel with that is really wanting to focus our approach in fundraising and both in facilities. So as the campus continues to grow, we've had a number of facility projects going on. This is a list of about 15 that are currently in process to completion, and that's a lot going on. So we also want to be very focused on the next from here to the Centennial Celebration, or for the next 5 years to 2025, on how we're going to meet the demands for research space, for student space. So the president may say a few words about these, but on the next slide, it also highlights kind of where the focus is on developing the next large facilities. And we've mentioned these already, the academic science building. That's not only the conversations we've been having with department chairs to determine what are the 3 to 5 departments that have the largest need for new space for both teaching and research, but also looking at that, how are we backfill that vacated space, looking at if Holden Hall, when it becomes part of the engineering key, how that backfill space and the new academics sciences building will be used in conjunction. So it's a larger plan across the institution, as well as some of the other things listed on there as far as a School of Music, architecture, the Masked Rider Pavilion, and not only just our academic buildings, but also a lot of our student buildings are at capacity. The library, the recreation center, whether we will at some point, talk about one additional residence hall to add to our campus. So those are the kind of things that are on the radar for the next 5-year, our longer term plan. I don't know if you, a few words.
Hey, Chris, could you go back to the previous slide? Just to elaborate a bit on what Noel has said here. So in October, we'll be having the groundbreaking for ESB2. That's a fabulous facility. That was funded through 2 sources, a $70 million tuition revenue bond from the last prior session from the state, and then we add an additional like $12 million. Phase one of the Majan Theater is coming to an end, and they're authorized to move forward with phase two. And I made this comment this morning, I think it's worth repeating here. If you look at a project like the Majan Theater, there was 2 gifts of $10 million. The institution, there was a gift of 3 from the CH. Helen Jones, 10. Talkington put in 10. Texas Tech University put in 10. And then there was a trip match, the Texas Research Incentive Program. That was something that was established when the National Research University Fund was also created. And the state will match dollar for dollar any gift of over $2 million, less for smaller gifts. But what's happened in that program is everybody's gotten into the game. And the amount of money in the queue that's eligible for a trip match has grown to over $80 million. The last session only funded $35 million. And so with the Majan Theater, we have $10 million coming from the trip, but we may not see that money for 4 to 5 years. So that means we have to make up that difference. But also it's changed the conversation with donors. When we say, if you give us X million dollars, we can get a trip match. Now we really can't do that as aggressively as we had in the past because the payout from that has been delayed to such an extent. Tomorrow we'll be going up to Amarillo to have the groundbreaking for the teaching facility at the School of Veterinary Medicine. It's going to be a fabulous event. It's a very historic occasion for Texas Tech University and the Texas Tech University system that we've raised $90 million for that facility. You've seen the renovation going on in Weeks Hall. It's been empty for years. And then the greenhouse relates to the facility for a member of the National Academy of Science that we hired a couple years ago. The dairy barn, we'll probably be taking that to the board in December maybe, but the plans are already prepared and that will happen. The Auditorium and Coliseum space, I don't know if you've seen that, but it's an attractive green area now. What are we going to do with it? Well, we will move that Drive of Champions north to accommodate an expansion of the baseball field. And then we were discussing very preliminarily another dorm residence there that might be shared with athletics. And that's okay. Next slide, please, Chris. The Academic Sciences Building, or whatever we decide to ultimately call it. That's going to be a major addition to the campus behind chemistry and just to the south of the physics building. There will be an additional probably construction in front of chemistry. That will be an $80 to $90 million project. If you look at our laboratories in biology, in the science building and chemistry, they're very substandard. And that's something that we're going to fund. We're going to actually invest in university resources to do that. Holden Hall will be ultimately occupied by engineering. And then we have an accreditation issue as it relates to the College of Visual and Performing Arts in the School of Music. And we have to provide some facility enhancements there that are fairly major. That's probably all I need to say here. The last thing I would mention, back to the comment that Noel made earlier about alternative revenue streams. We really are looking for ways to generate revenue so we're not so dependent on just tuition. And if you recall that slide Noel showed with the bars, you saw the black state support was bigger, got smaller. Red, that was tuition, small, got larger. But there were 2 things on top. One was restricted funds and the other was auxiliary. The auxiliary is about 20% of our budget. The restricted is money that we get from our endowment proceeds as well as grants. That's been hovering around 13%. That's one way we can certainly enhance the revenue at our disposal. But we're considering some other more novel ways. We're in discussions right now with a number of potential partners and pending final approval from the board, and we have brought this to them already, of locating a hotel across from Covenant. It would be a public-private partnership. It's a wonderful location. That's still very preliminary. If you were to go over to 4th Street, where they're building a new Veterans Administration facility, we sold that property to HSC. And then HSC leased that to the VA. And we retained property along Indiana that we're going to try to develop with commercial and retail that would service the interests there at the Veterans Administration Clinic. And then we have received, finally from the IRS, approval of our application for a 501c3 under which the Innovation Hub and Research Park will operate. That will give us more flexibility and will expedite the way in which we can enter into facility constructions there to accommodate tenants. That will be an important priority going forward in the next few years, to develop the Innovation Park and Research Hub. And there's some opportunities for commercial and retail development over there as well. A lot of this is very preliminary, but I do think we have to be thinking outside the box and how we're going to generate revenue streams to complement what we traditionally get just from tuition.
So speaking of land, the core of our campus continues to increase in number of pedestrian traffic as well, faculty, staff, students, vehicular traffic, Lime scooters. And we need to look at the core of our campus and really the safety of that as it grows too. You'll recall a couple years ago, we closed 15th Street as it passes in front of Plant Soil Science during certain hours of the day. This summer, we closed 15th Street as it enters off of University, and that is now surface parking instead of providing access directly through or into campus. And next summer, we will close the remainder of 15th Street. So the portion that is running in front of the Student Union between the Administration Building and the Student Union will be closed so that we are, again, moving the traffic more out of the center and the core of campus, looking more to get the buses on an exterior route for those that are coming from off campus. They would unload at that new surface lot off of 15th Street, walk up to the Honors College, and get an inner loop connection so that we decrease the number of buses that are running through, and there will no longer be buses running in front of the Student Union. And in doing so, we also looked at how we can beautify. So this is a very exciting project as we look at beautification of the administrative parking lot and really extending the pedestrian walkway from Memorial Circle through and under the Administration Building up to the Student Union. The concept drawing there is to extend the paver and not a water feature through the center there, as has been asked. But we really look forward to this project, and that'll kick off next summer. The Centennial Celebration.
Good afternoon, everyone. In 2023, we will be celebrating Texas Tech's 100th birthday. The president has assembled a committee chaired by me and Dr. Elisa Wong. We're in the very early stages of the planning with projects already underway, and we'll start ramping up the planning phase at the beginning of next year. The celebration will begin with the Carol of Lights in 2022 and end with the Carol of Lights in 2023. We'll invite entertainers to be a part of the festivities, as well as include 3D imaging on the Administration Building. Some of the other plans are included are a book entitled 100 Years, 100 Voices, development of a website where people can provide their stories and comments and suggestions, along with a timeline of memorable moments and milestones. There will also be building banners and many more activities. Although there will be some exciting celebrations throughout the year, more importantly, this will be an opportunity to tell Texas Tech's story, where we've been, where we are, and where we hope to be. Texas Tech is, as you know, is steeped in traditions, and we will celebrate those traditions in telling our story, just as we will honor and celebrate those who have laid a path to what to what our great institution is today. Our major focus will nevertheless be on our next 100 years. The Centennial is a perfect opportunity to reaffirm and strengthen our brand and to refocus on our students, faculty, staff, alums, to define what Texas Tech will achieve in the next century and to confront our challenges. We assure you that we will celebrate our constituents, aside from those I've mentioned, including our colleges, our regional sites, our Costa Rica campus, and our new vet school. And of course, we will include the Lubbock community in this celebration. This will be an exciting time for Texas Tech, and we hope every one of you will share and participate in the celebration. Thanks so much.
And with that, concludes what we wanted to say. There's a microphone there if you need it, but we'd love to have any questions or comments from you. Well, thank you very much. Wait, there were no comments. I think I think we should say it. This came up this morning, and I think it's worth elaborating on because I hear it all the time. Let's talk about the Lime scooters.
We do hear comments all the time on the Lime scooters, and we recognize Dr. Heppert firsthand had to help a student out from under a bus last year, I believe it was. We get reports of student injuries or I shouldn't say students, anyone driving scooters in wrong places, parking them in wrong places. But when we did an RFP and we selected Lime as our partner, we did so because this was something the students wanted on our campus. We selected Lime because they had the best safety program. They include on their app a safety information that a student has to at least click through before they can unlock and rent one of the Lime scooters. There was a safety fair that they held last Thursday that provided a helmet to all of those that went there. They are great partners as long as we communicate back to them. If you see a scooter in the wrong place, parked in the wrong place, if you see something happening that shouldn't be happening, if you report that to University Transportation Services or Lime, they do track those back on the app, a certain number of violations, and they'll be locked out of that app. And one of the questions that came up this morning, and I followed up on, is the speed. So they are set at a 12-mile-per-hour speed, and something that was just tested during the athletic football game is slowdown zones, and it worked very well. It's actually controlled by the app, a slowdown zone of 6 miles per hour. So if you tell us other areas that are a problem, we are going to be testing more of these slowdown zones in high traffic areas as well.
I was looking around the room to see if any of the people that I'm going to refer to are here, and they're not, so I can say what I want. A few weeks ago, we had a survey that was put out by the Chronicle on best places to work. Our results, they bothered me, but I must admit it's a very small sample space, about 600 of our 6,500 employees and only about 38 faculty. So you have to take it all with a grain of salt. But nevertheless, I know there's a group of faculty who meet at J&B Coffee every morning. So I went over there at 7:30 just to talk to them and just to hear what was on their mind. I got out of there about 11 o'clock. And one of them said, "This has been very therapeutic." I go, "Yeah, for you." But the issue of the scooters came up, and I shared this story. Like yesterday, I was driving on campus. They were coming right down the lane on the wrong side of the road. Okay, you can get mad or you can have this effect. I was driving across campus the other day, and when they're driving around you, they kind of just float. You know, you don't see the movement. So it's kind of a surreal experience, and I would say take that point of view of it as an out-of-body experience, and don't let it get on your nerves. But the safety issue is not a joking matter, and I can assure you we take that very seriously. Yes. Yes, there's. Yeah, so when the students go through orientation, there are several training processes they have to go through as it relates to sexual assault, alcohol, and that's all part of the orientation. Yeah. Oh, you're saying for that. Oh, I see. I missed the point. Yeah. Okay, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Okay. If there's no more, I know your time is valuable. Our hour is at an end. Thank you so much for coming.